Welcome to the show. I'm JJ Flazanes, your host. Thank you for downloading today's episode. I love this conversation today, and it went in places I had no idea it was going to go, quite honestly. It was perfect divine guidance, perfect divine timing, and I'm bringing it to you now because I think it's also divine timing to publish it at this time. We're going to talk about cultivating internal knowing, and I'm bringing back Karen Newell. She is a co-founder of Sacred Acoustics, and she works with and is partnered with Dr. Eben Alexander, who is also coming back on the show. So before we get into today's interview and a little bit more about Karen, I wanted to tell you a couple little stories that came out of today's show that I didn't say during the show because I thought about it afterwards. And it has to do with cultivating internal knowing and what that means. And we could even call that intuition. We could call that basically increasing your psychic abilities, your powers of intuition and connectivity and picking up on different messages. And we also talk about animal telepathy and just telepathy in general in today's show. And because we were talking about things and things were coming up for me, it wasn't until after the fact that I remembered all these different stories that I had that actually were the same. Many times over the years, I have been interviewing healers and intuitives and clairvoyants and people with gifts. And I do remember feeling as if a lot of them would say, well, you can't really have my gifts because my gifts are my gifts and people are gifted or they're not gifted. And it's never really set well with me. While I do understand some people have talents that other people don't have in life, after learning all of the brain activity science and the neuroplasticity that's available in our brains, both from mind to matter, as well as the episode we did with Harville Hendrix way long ago called Your Relationship Explained, you take all of that science, the science literally of law of attraction, and I now understand a whole different level of how some people are built to have gifts. And I think some people can be trained. And that's what we talk about on today's show. And my proof of my evolution years ago, on this show today, we talk about animal telepathy. And I don't remember if it was Suki. She was a kitten that we got that ended up contracting a disease and dying, or if it was Luna when she first came into our lives. I think it was Suki. My ex-husband and I wanted to make sure Domino, my cat at the time, I still have Domino, she's my oldest cat, I wanted to make sure she felt my love for her. So I wanted to make sure I gave her my time. So at that time, I remember that I took a couple nights out of the week and I slept in the guest bedroom with Domino only. And I had the intention that I was going to cuddle with her and give her all my full attention. And I remember shutting the door and getting ready to go to bed and just spend the night with Domino. I remember her standing at the door, and I don't think she said anything, but I literally heard her say, "I'm okay, Mom. We can all sleep together." And I got up and I thought, okay. So I opened the door and we all went into the bedroom, and that was the first night the two cats slept in the bed with us. So I know that I heard her, and it doesn't happen all the time. I don't try to make that talent or skill better, but today's show actually helped me to understand that I could. And you know what? I'm going to, because I really need to be able to communicate with my animals a little bit better. And while I'll still ask healers and intuitives and clairvoyants and people whose abilities are stronger to help me when I can't do it, I do believe after today's show that I can learn to do it, and I will. And then more recently, so Dr. Eben Alexander's also been interviewed again. I have not released that show yet, and it was about healing. And by the end of the show, we talked about Anita Moorjani. Anita Moorjani wrote a book called Dying to Be Me. Anita had a situation where I believe she had stage 4 cancer, and I think she might have crossed over for a minute or two and then came back and was healed. Now, I'm simplifying the story. I do have the book, and I will have the book read, but I thought, oh, well, I know someone who knows Anita. She lives down the street. Let me see if she'll be on the show. So I reached out to Anita, and she was really busy. She was writing her 3rd book, and so the timing wasn't right. But I was feeling like, okay, I don't want to publish this show and talk about her book and her without having her on, and I feel she's so within reach. So I think I asked again, and again, I kind of got like a no. Well, I have a friend that works with her professionally and personally. They're really good friends. And over the weekend, we went to a fireworks event in Manhattan Beach, my very favorite fireworks event. And for those of you that follow me on Instagram, you'll see the pictures and the videos. And in fact, there's a picture there. And when my friend responded to me and said she was going to bring 2 other people on the Evite, I knew immediately. I had the picture in my head that she was bringing Anita and her husband. So later when she reached out to me and she let me know, hey, I'm bringing Anita, I said, I know. Like, I was super clear. And it was another confirmation that my gifts, my abilities continue to improve. Now, why do I think they continue to improve? Because I'm doing the work that we do at the live events, which, by the way, aren't going to happen again until 2021. So I know a lot of you think that you're going to come to one of my live events, but I don't know when the next one will be. And that's not a sales tactic. I'm very seriously telling you right now, I don't know that I'll do another live event, but this may be the last time we do Releasing What Weighs You Down, because new things are happening and we've done it now 2 other times. It's super powerful. And this coming January is our 3rd and most likely last time. So if you're someone who feels like you have gifts that need to be uncovered, you want to remove patterns and blocks that you have in relationship, that you have in money, that you have just in life in general, I'm begging you, please do what you can and be at this event, because it probably is the last time. But 2020 has such amazing, powerful goals for me personally that things are shifting and growing and evolving. And it's a great event. There is nothing more powerful than being with us live, doing those live clearing inherited emotional DNA clearings, learning how to do it yourself, doing the meditations, doing all of the things we're going to work on, all the brain activities to really stimulate new motor pathways, both for your muscles as well as for your emotions, to create this space to do exactly what we're talking about on this show today, which is cultivating internal knowing. Think about a sports team. A sports team is a high level of athlete that wants to get better at something. And so they practice. But they're involved in a high level commitment of practice. And so I just want you to think about some of the things that get offered to you on this show or just in life in general. If you're not in a high level practice of some kind, being held accountable and learning new things, then the default is you're just sort of waiting for something to happen, which is kind of victim mentality. So when you want to make a change, you actually have to do something about it. You have to get a little uncomfortable and you have to be a little vulnerable and put yourself out there in order for you to shift and grow. Otherwise, you just stay comfortably in your comfort zone. And all of the skills can be learned. I'm living proof. I loved this conversation today just because of that. It's literally the proof that, yes, I continue to evolve and my powers of intuition get stronger every year. Let's talk about Karen. Karen's the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics, and on the last show, she offered a free 20-minute binaural beat download that you can get at jjflazanes.com/sacred audio. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, if you're interested in coming to Releasing What Weighs You Down, just email me, go to jjflazanes.com, go to releasingwhatweighsyoudown.com, message me somehow, and I can make sure you get that link. But it's releasingwhatweighsyoudown.com. So Karen Newell is an innovator in the emerging field of brainwave entrainment audio meditation. She's the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics and empowers others in their journeys of self-discovery. Using Sacred Acoustics recordings, she teaches how to connect to inner guidance, achieve inspiration, improve wellness, and develop intuition. In her search for answers to fundamental questions, it became clear that direct experience is crucial to full understanding. To bolster her strong sense of inner knowing and alignment with her higher nature, she enrolled in a series of hands-on experiential courses to investigate and develop such skills such as lucid dreaming, astral travel, telepathy, remote viewing, self-hypnosis, and different forms of energy healing. At international workshops presented with best-selling author Dr. Eben Alexander, Karen demonstrates key practices of consciousness exploration, heart awareness, intention, maintaining neutrality, emotional management, and cultivating internal knowing. She is the co-author with Dr. Alexander of their latest book, Living in a Mindful Universe, A Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Heart of Consciousness. Find out more about Karen and any of the links that I've mentioned in the show notes below. Welcome back to the show, Karen.
Thank you, JJ. Thanks for having me back.
I've heard from my community, those who have downloaded the Sacred Acoustics audio that we offered, to them, which was jjflazanes.com/sacred audio, that they've used it and they love it. And so I wanted to dive a little deeper into some of the work that got you into doing this and what some of the results are. And when we last talked, we had such a fun conversation, and I wanted to bring it even more focused into a line that I had read in your bio. I'm just going to read it now so everyone knows where I'm going with this, which was heart awareness. And we did talk about heart math a little bit last time. Intention, maintaining neutrality, emotional management, and cultivating internal knowing. So what's really front and center for me right now is in using intuition in business, using intuition in life, being able to trust that inner knowing. So what sticks out is that emotional management and cultivating internal knowing. Let's talk about how what your path and journey has been to develop the tools and practices that you have to create this and then teach it.
Well, I'll start with the inner knowing. That was something when I was very young. And many children, I think, have this ability to really know inside when someone's telling you the truth or not. There's this certain feeling that would come over me when I thought I wasn't being given a proper truthful statement. And this mostly happened in school and church. So it wasn't, it was big things people would tell me, and I would feel inside that they weren't true. And so I had a lot of trouble buying into, for example, the Methodist teachings that I was being taught. And many of us, as we get older, just kind of give up and agree with what the adults say, but I didn't. And I kind of came to call this my truth meter. And part of it was the cognitive patterns that I would notice with my intellectual mind, but another part was just this feeling inside. And of course, as I grew older, I came to know this as what you just said, as intuition. And I wasn't always able to trust that intuition, even though I said I maintained that sort of truth meter ability. It was not easy to always agree with that intuitive knowing inside. And I'll give an example of that. I was actually involved in a relationship, and I kept having dreams that this person was with other women. And I dismissed the dreams. I thought, oh, I'm just making all of this up. And then later I learned, yes, he had in fact been with a lot of other women. And yet I ignored that inner feeling. And so even though I say I maintained it since I was a child, I'm like everyone else, still trying to, those most important personal issues are sometimes the ones that we just can't recognize and follow our intuition. And I think it's because it's so related to our emotions and our subjective kind of opinions about things. And we get very wrapped up into emotional engagement in certain topics and people, and we don't want to let go. It's very challenging to truly accept that intuition while we're questioning our own reactions to it all. So that's kind of the basis of where it all, of the topic. But how I learned to tackle all of that was, first I had to learn to trust my intuition. And one of the ways I did that was I started taking courses in animal communication, in remote viewing, anything that kind of taught telepathic sort of skills, how to get information from your mind, from your body, whatever it is. And this is what helped me learn that I did have these kind of telepathic abilities. You're taught when you take these kind of classes that we all have these abilities. No one is better or worse than the others, but some of us need to practice more. And so learning that I could understand what an animal was telling me was very useful. That sounds kind of strange, but I'll give you an example of that. When I was in one of my courses, I remember we were given a list of questions to ask the dogs. These dogs would come in with their owners, and then we could validate afterwards if our answers were correct. And so one of the questions that I asked this poodle was, are you happy with your life? And the answer I got was, I would like to have my bed by the window. And I thought that was very random. And yet when I explained that to the owner, she looked kind of happy and said, oh yes, well, our dog doesn't have a bed, but just yesterday we borrowed a bed from a friend to see if our dog would like to have a bed. And they placed it in front of a window where the dog stayed all day long looking out of the window where there was a playground with children playing. And so this to them was validation. Oh yes, very casually accepting, I guess we'll get a bed for our dog because they like it. And inside for me, it was, oh my God, I just got a message from a dog and understood it. And so the more I did these sorts of things, the more I started to learn I could trust my inner promptings. And remote viewing helped with that as well.
Let's back up to this telepathic idea of being able to hear the dog and go through like the mechanics of that. So was it that you walk us through how that happens in terms of you come in, you talk with the dog, you don't talk with the dog, you pet the dog, you don't, you sit, you meditate, you look at the dog, you listen for ideas. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, well, here's how it was explained to me. What we were asked to do was to connect with the dogs with our heart. So you mentioned the heart earlier, and the heart kept coming up over and over when I would take these kind of classes. And so the teacher said, well, don't connect with your mind, connect with your heart. And so we would sit in front of the dogs. We didn't touch the dogs. They would just sit in front of us. And we were asked to connect with our hearts. Now, what does that mean exactly? No one really explained that to me, how you connect to an animal with your heart. And so I pretended. I just thought, well, my heart is connecting with the dog and that's how this works. And so that pretending, when I didn't understand the mechanics of it, really got me through it. And no one could really explain how it worked. We all need to kind of come up with a way of these non-physical activities can't be explained like you would explain how a ball might be pitched to a catcher in a baseball game. You know, the techniques are much more personal and subtle. And so I would pretend as if I was getting information or connecting to the dog to ask my question. And when the information came back to me, it sort of just bubbled up into my mind like a thought. And then I was able to put words to it. But how amazing that it was, I want to have my bed by the window. That was quite a specific thing. Another dog, I asked the question, what's your favorite toy? And the answer was a blue ball. And of course, I thought that was a little more standard kind of dog answer that I might have made up in my head. But when I asked the owner about that one, she said, well, our dog doesn't have a favorite toy, but just yesterday he found a blue ball on a walk and he hasn't let go of it since. And so again, that was further validation. But this idea of pretending I'm connecting, this pretending is very powerful because this is how we engage our non-physical energy part of ourselves, by creating that sort of mental intention and acting as if we're going through those motions. And so that was how it worked. And the information came to me, I stated it out loud, and then it was validated.
So from all that I've been learning and researching, when you're talking about you're connecting, we teach cord cutting in the workshops that we do with releasing what weighs you down, one of the aspects of one of the energetic healing techniques. And so also thinking about energy fields, like when you said connect with the dog's heart, or make a heart connection. I guess for me, the idea of, and I know the word pretending, because it's going to be different for everyone, how you actually use your energy field more specifically to, again, achieve that. I'm thinking of like auras connecting and inviting somebody in energetically from like an energy field. So back, I'm sure you've seen The Secret, correct? The movie.
I know of it, yes.
Well, what I loved about what they did with vibration is they made it physical. Like you could see like a wave of energy in when you had a thought, and how it was like it penetrated the earth, so to speak, and everything around you. I thought that giving it form was super powerful. And so for me, when I think of an energy field that I have around me, everybody's energy field, a dog's energy field, I think of those things sort of coming together in that bubble, if you will. So it's just fascinating, because as you're talking about pretending and what that might look like or feel like to you, this is what was coming to me. Now I want to know, when you got that information, did it come across as a picture in your mind, or were they words?
In my case, it comes across as words, as a thought concept, not an image. It may be that, dogs don't have words, don't have a linguistic center. So it may be that they were just sending me their feeling experience of it, and my mind interpreted it into words, not from an image, but from a thought. But when you mention this energy field, something that I learned after I took all of these animal communication courses was about the electromagnetic field that emanates from the heart. And it actually comes out of the heart math. This is the heart math research that you referred to. And this electromagnetic field emits from the heart, and it expands and contracts based on your emotional state. It actually it expands rather large out around your body, at least 3 feet. And in fact, every time they create a new device to measure that electromagnetic field, we seem to reach the limits of how far it can go. So in my mind, that electromagnetic field may actually be I don't know if infinite is a right word, but a much larger than we might think. Now, I have to say that it's always pointed out to me I know it's very useful to have that model, physical model, and that's been very useful to me, this electromagnetic field idea, like you were talking about with the thought waves. But one thing that is important to remember is that this intuitive connection can happen with people from all the way around the world. It is not limited by distance. And so I don't want the listeners to get confused and think that we're imagining that something might physically emanate from my body to someone completely all the way around the world. But it is very useful to think of that when you're sitting across from a person, or when you're sitting across from a dog. And in fact, they have discovered that the electromagnetic field of one person does actually affect the people around you. And so it is able to adjust your brainwave state and your heart rate variability. If someone is performing what they call a coherence technique, which is basically just generating a feeling of gratitude, sitting across from someone else who doesn't know what's going on, that person feeling gratitude is able to influence that other person in positive ways. So this is a really interesting facet of our energetic bodies that I think is very useful for us to be aware of.
It's absolutely what I have used and teach with law of attraction practices in relationship, about influencing, getting yourself into a space where, again, you're in a state of appreciation or love or joy or freedom, and allowing that to influence someone else's either behavior, response, or even just how you show up or how you co-create with them in that moment. Again, choosing a frequency that you both can be at, and attracting or pulling out of somebody the best of them, or the frequency that you are on, because you're in a better, more powerful, better feeling place. So
exactly. And that resonance almost not forces, but causes the other person to then resonate back to you. That's what you're describing. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think what's really fascinating, I know you're a Sag. Remind me of your moon.
Cancer.
Okay. All right. There it is. All right. So, because I'm the opposite in the fire and water, and Sag, I'm a Pisces with a Sag moon and a Sag rising and a Sag soul.
Yes.
And so I think often that I try to explain, and I know, I do it from both sides as best as I can. I want to know your experience because I would imagine as a Sag first that you're the truth seeking, the information gathering, the learning, the expansion, the interest, the intrigue that Sages have about learning and truth seeking that I can't get away from, keeps us, I believe, many times in our head, because we love figuring things out. We love learning and taking that information, which sometimes can be that stops us from living from that heart space. And so I think that because you and I seem to have the same balance of that sort of brain activity and heart, and like what was strengthened first. Mine actually was in reverse. Mine was that I was the feeler. And then, because I didn't actually think I was smart, and until I learned science of the body in when I started personal training, and I recognized that I actually could do science. Science was never interesting to me because it wasn't mechanical. I couldn't see it. The minute I started doing personal training and learning about physiology and used a old program from, I think it was called Atom, and they would go through literally an action potential, which is the action potential of the brain idea of having to move, and then all of the chemical and electrical processes that happened from the action potential into muscle contraction. And when you explain it just with words, it never stuck. I'd get confused. I wouldn't be able to learn it. And then the minute the Atom company took it and made it graphic, made it mechanical, put color to it, made the electrical versus the chemical super easy to see it, then I could remember it quickly. And so I'm curious as to what in your experience has been, it sounds like it was for you maybe logical first and then heart. Am I incorrect in that, or is that on par?
You're absolutely correct. I was reading at age 4. Both my parents were very big readers, and we were constantly reading, constantly learning. And I took that all the way through my entire school year. Learning was very easy for me, memorizing, reading, all of that, exactly the opposite of you. And yet I had this detriment in feeling. And so what I mean by that is I grew up understanding, and I think many of us do, that it's not appropriate to lose control or, be over emotional out in public, out in the world. And so we were taught to, don't cry and keep it to yourself. And so in the process of doing this, I would have hurt feelings that I had to just put away. I had to put them inside. And so I was actively taught not to feel. And I learned that when I was at school and had an opinion that I wanted to share with the teacher, that it wasn't appropriate to interrupt and to really just keep my mouth shut. And so that's what I did. I kind of suppressed my feelings about certain things just to get along in the world. And I grew up with brothers, and boys and girls are raised differently. And I learned this through personal experience when I began to interact with girls out in the world. They communicate with each other very differently than boys. And I was much more conditioned to be with boys, where feelings aren't quite as important in that interpersonal interaction. And people can kind of get over things very quickly. But as I got older, I realized that suppressing my emotions was really a detriment to my very being, because when I first wanted to learn how to generate feelings of gratitude, I didn't know how. I remembered what it felt like, but I could never generate it on my own, just at will. And so I had to practice and learn how to do that. Similar to you finding a technique that, where you were able to learn more readily, I had to actually practice generating these kinds of feelings. I was used to reacting in situations and feeling emotional when something external would trigger me, but I didn't have the ability to really manage my emotions more consciously. And that's what I had to learn how to do. So yes, just like, the logical learning came very easy to me, the emotional learning was a little more tricky. And of course, I'm a work in progress like everybody else. I still have my reactive moments, but I've learned through different forms of meditation to identify with what I call the inner observer. That's the part of you, some people call it the witness, but it's the part of you when you're meditating that notices when your mind starts to wander. It's another part of you that really has no emotional reactiveness. It's a neutral part of you. And I've learned to hold that perspective in meditation, and then in my daily life, when I'm in a conflict, I can kind of turn that perspective on potentially simultaneously while I'm having a conflict. And that neutral observer from that bigger perspective will kick in and suggest in my mind that maybe if I changed my behavior, I might diffuse the situation. And that's exactly how it's worked. So it's very useful to learn not only to feel, but also to maintain that neutrality. And that's what I mean by emotional management.
So using meditation, intuition, and this inner observer to take a different assessment, take a different perspective in the moment.
Yes, exactly. So for example, if I'm in a conflict with my daughter, and all I'm thinking about in that moment is I need to tell her, the way things work. You know how that is when you're a parent. But when the inner observer kicks in, you can get this other perspective of, oh, if this is what she needs to hear in order to turn her around, and if I can only say that, then the conversation will turn. And that's exactly what happens. It's a much different way of managing a conflict than I maybe had done, 10, 20 years ago.
The definition of emotional management has been, I mean, it sounds like a very easy term to understand, but the application of it changes depending on what perspective you have and how you're using it. So I was curious, and I'm glad you explained that in terms of using that inner observer along with being able to pull back and then use your intuition to maybe do something differently. Because I've done a show on emotional management from a therapeutic perspective, from a therapy perspective. And I would even take it another direction also, and add another element to it of the understanding. I'm taking a body of work right now and I'm refining it and I don't even know what to call it. Emotional management is not it, but to me, it's like the truth of emotions from both that logical as well as heart space. And so to kind of circle back around to that place where a lot of us are really in our heads way too much and we're not feeling. And so you just mentioned being a work in progress, as we all are, but really over identifying in a way with the men and not really tapping into that feminine power that we all have. Even if you're a man, you have feminine power. And even if you're a woman, you have masculine power, but your masculine sounds dominant. And as a Sag, I would imagine that would be the case. It is for me. And it hasn't always been that way, because as a Pisces, I was extremely emotional. Didn't realize I was a victim though, until I moved to California and my first coach introduced me to the law of attraction. And when I heard Abraham say, "You are the creator of your own reality," that was the moment in which I understood that I could change what I didn't like and that I was the one attracting it. So from that point on, it was the uncovering of the thought processes I had before versus now, and being able to balance really that mental and emotional aspect. Because too many people think law of attraction and frequency and vibration is about your mind. And we know it's really about your emotions, and it's how the two come together. So first I want to talk about if there's any place in your life that you noticed detriment or conflict or contrast, or any pain or disease, things that maybe kept manifesting because of the lack of connection to the emotions. Did you have any challenges that kept presenting themselves that said, this is a feeling situation, we really need you? I mean, it could be just as simple as conversations with your daughter, it sounds like.
Well, I do have a very poignant example, actually. When I was 7 years old, my parents decided to get divorced. My father had been in Vietnam for 2 years, and they just, weren't getting along, and it was a amicable divorce. They did it in a very friendly way. There was no fighting, but it became clear that with all the time apart, they weren't going to stay together. And so they asked me and my two brothers, we were all close in age, but I was 7. They asked who would we wish to live with, which I thought was a big question to ask a 7-year-old, to choose a parent. But for me, it was very simple because my father had not been there. I said, well, of course I'm going to choose my mother. I don't feel like I know my father. And I decided in that moment, I don't need my father. And in reality, I learned much, much later that what I really felt was abandoned by him. And my defense mechanism was to declare that I didn't need him. And so we all know that at age 7, when you're forming relationships with your parents, it can have a big influence on how you deal in relationships later in life. And I was no exception. And so what happened was, when I engaged in romantic relationships with men, and they didn't quite meet up to my expectations, I decided it didn't matter, that I could still be with them, but that I didn't need to be loved by them, that I would be just fine on my own. I was very independent. That's another Sagittarian quality, but it was also very much reinforced by the way I was raised. And so in relationship, I was so independent that inside, I didn't think I needed to be loved by anyone, but that I could still have relationships. And of course, I had 2 failed marriages, and they both related to selecting people that, as you said, met my internal expectation of not being really loved properly and really kind of being emotionally abandoned. And so once I figured that out and got out of that last relationship, it's impossible for something like that to ever happen again, because I've changed my inner way of being. And so as you say, when you change yourself, it changes everything around you. And really, it's not even possible, I don't believe, for me to be involved in a relationship now where I would allow that to happen. And so these are big, they can be small, but they can also, one little decision at age 7, well-meaning and important in that moment, so that I didn't feel sad and abandoned as a child, yet it set me up for not really knowing how to manage myself in that kind of relationship. And coupled with that was this idea of being raised with boys. And so I thought of men always as my brother, and so it was very interesting how I navigated those types of relationships. I would say over the first 45 years of my life, had a little bit of a detriment because of that fateful decision.
And so do you feel like that was the groundwork, so to speak, to have you be interested in the work that you're doing now? I know most of us teach what we need to learn, and we work on things hopefully to heal that which we have been wounded by. And not always, sometimes we just repeat patterns when we're unconscious about whatever our wounds are. But what led you into even focusing on the work that you're doing now? Like what was the pull or the push?
Well, very interesting. That absolutely was not the drive to get me interested in this sort of thing, but it definitely was what I uncovered along the way. And so my initial drive for all of this was really just wanting to understand how the world worked. I wanted to understand intellectually. And so I had been reading and reading and reading my whole life. I wanted to move beyond the typical sort of Western Christian teachings, and I read a lot of other sort of esoteric writings, things like Kabbalah, Theosophy, Anthroposophy, some Eastern teachings, but I was more drawn to the Western esoterica because I have a Western mind, and they all seem to kind of converge together in the end. But eventually, with all of this seeking of knowledge, as you aptly described Sagittarians, that fits me to a T. I wanted the truth of the universe, and it wasn't available in books or writings. People always seem to contradict themselves, or contradict each other when I would read the different options. And I couldn't pick one of these belief systems as being true above all others. But what I realized was this kind of knowledge from books isn't enough to really understand how the world works. Personal direct experience is key. And so I wanted to generate experience. I wanted to learn how to be telepathic. I wanted to learn how to have an out-of-body experience. I wanted to learn how to communicate with spirit guides and all of those kinds of things that I was reading about. And so I set upon a pathway of cultivating and generating personal experience for the purpose of understanding how the world works. And that grander sort of motivation was fabulous, but in the end, what I was really doing was pushing myself to grow personally and to tackle those emotional issues that I was very used to just leaving to the side. I thought, oh, I can handle my emotions, I'm just fine, and I could stay balanced. And yet, when I first started meditating, when I first started learning techniques of going within and quieting the mind, one of the first things I encountered were these deep feelings of loneliness and despair that I didn't even realize I had. And once I started uncovering those, triggering them, releasing them, transforming them into something else, that's when I started to understand how the world works. And so I wasn't going to find it in a book or someone explaining it neatly to me. I needed to experience it firsthand. And many people will have these spiritual experiences that kind of come unbidden, or some people grow up naturally being telepathic and able to communicate with souls of departed loved ones like mediums do. Lots of people have these natural abilities, and yet not all of us are able to tap in. And it's possible for all of us to do it. I completely believe that, because when I first started doing this, I was as dense as a doorknob when it came to sensing and feeling energy and to understanding how to connect with those animals. I was one of those people just kicking and screaming, wanting it to just be handed to me with neat little instructions, but that's not how it works. And once I started to really generate these types of experiences, then it all really came together.
I'm glad that you said that, because what I have found over the years is when I come at intuition and clairvoyance and telepathic abilities, let's say, when you ask someone with gifts how someone else can learn how to have gifts, some of them don't think anyone else can have them. And I'm not saying I believe there are definitely degrees of gifts that people can have, but I also 100% know that the neural pathways that we create, as you were doing, as you were in there learning, the more you created these different brain patterns, the more you had the ability to have an experience. And so that's science that I know you know very well, and science that I've been learning. So I look at it as building muscle. If you've never been in a gym and you've never exercised ever, then everything's going to be pretty hard at first. Your body doesn't know what to do with it. When I use exercise on people and we start, let's say, it's always with women, it's very interesting over the years, doing like a chest press, let's say. I'll take them through the neurological pathway first so that they understand where they're pulling from and where they're pulling to, and how to engage their muscle with their brain, so that we're actually activating those fibers in order to make the muscle contract and to move the bones and the joints in the way they need to move. It's not a tracing a line outside of themselves. It's going deeper to actually activate the movement from within. And that neural pattern, which I know very well and talk about and never can ever show anybody on a video, or, I mean, I can show them, but it isn't until I work with someone one-on-one that they actually get the experience. Because as you said, you can read it in a book, I can explain it, they can hear it, but until you feel it, until you understand the process and you can see how your brain can contract or not, and can activate new fibers and new tissues when you focus on it, when you visualize it, when you understand what's happening in the body, all of a sudden we create new neural pathways in the body, which is how I believe we go about rehabbing most of the things that we have going on with our bodies, which is why my training is very different than anyone else I know when it comes to personal training. But taking that same concept, because I recently taught it at my manifestation boot camp, I thought, I'm just in the beginning stages, because as I think I said to both you and Dr. Alexander before, I'm that intuitive knower. I am that emotional intuitive knower that I personally don't need the science to know it's true. However, it is fun to learn the science, to be able to teach it, and to be able to take someone from disbelief to belief, to be able to know without a shadow of a doubt, because I understand the sciences of these spiritual or emotional principles that other people poo-poo because they don't think it's valid. And when you can scientifically show its value and its proof, all of a sudden now we've switched gears, and this energy healing woo-woo stuff is science. And that's what I love about that. So taking that, being able to learn, to be able to open up and again, stimulate parts of the brain that before were dormant and now can experience these other healing and energetic modalities that the majority of people don't know how to do and think are so different from who they are. I love knowing and I love hearing that you said that, you worked hard at it and you can do it, which means all of us can. And I think it's just a shift in perspective and understanding on, it's not that everyone in the world who is clairvoyant or clairsentient, then we move into that whole conversation of, for the ones that are the feelers first, because I have a lot of friends that are very gifted, but on one hand, while they're spiritually gifted and connect in those realms faster than I can, on the mental plane, they don't have the same understanding or observer perspective or ability to problem solve their issues because they feel them so much and they drown in their feelings so much that I would love some of them to use their mental capacity to pull back in observer mode and do a little problem solving so they stop drowning in their feelings. So that's why this conversation is really morphed into something beautiful, because I think you and I represent this very beautifully, the dichotomy and the balance of how much brain activity, how much mental activity versus how much emotional and physiological activity are we using on a day-to-day basis to have emotional management, to use our intuition, to have knowing and a deep knowing. Because too often, especially on a show like mine and in a podcast situation, people are listening, they're driving, they're using their brain and their bodies to take in this information and assess how they feel about it, if it resonates, if they think it's true, what they will do about it. And so thank you for sharing. I know we shared that in the last conversation that we had as well, but I think it's even more important to me in this moment because I'm moving into wanting to help connect people who are on a journey, not only of health, but of wealth, and connect all of it together. I think too often we make choices that focus on in one direction, and then we let the other things go by the wayside. We don't give everything that's important in our life balance and appropriate time dedication, if you will. So I want everyone to hear that if you would like to increase your intuition, you can do it. And you can do all of these things. If you're someone who wants to communicate with animals, you can. Maybe you're so far from it, but Karen is giving you the proof that it is possible. And I know that the work that you're doing also can help bridge that gap to help people get there. So why don't we talk about Sacred Acoustics?
Right. The sound was another key for me, along with what I say is heart awareness. But sound was absolutely critical at helping me to get behind the idea that I actually could meditate. That word meditate for me was a very challenging word, because when I thought of meditation, I would think of, Tibetan monks sitting in caves who were dedicated to this 24/7. And I just couldn't imagine putting that kind of effort in, because I had a job and a child to raise and all of this. And so meditation was scary to me. And when I would, in my community, sort of seek out ways to learn how to do it, it usually involved, a Buddhist community or something like that, which really intimidated me, because I didn't want to have to adopt some large belief system just to, learn how to learn this ability. And so I would do it on my own, and I would just follow the general meditation advice to close your eyes and focus on your breath. And then when you notice your mind is wandering, return your attention to the breath. And so I would do this, and I would set the alarm for 10 minutes, and I would think an hour had gone by, and I'd squeeze open my eye and maybe only 2 minutes had passed. And it was really challenging to sit still. But when I started adding certain sounds to that routine, it became much, much easier. And these are specific sounds. At first, it was things like crystal bowls and brass bowls, or tuning forks or gongs, sounds like that kind of just have this one sort of resonant tone that makes kind of like a wah, wah, wah sound. And those can be very kind of luring to get into a relaxed state. And specifically, binaural beats are designed to create that wah, wah sound. And they're designed to affect the brainwave state. So a binaural beat is when you put one frequency in one ear and a slightly different frequency in the other ear. And it's the difference between the two that equals the brainwave state that we're trying to achieve. So for example, we often include a 4 hertz signal in these binaural beats because that's that border between awake and asleep, where the body can become profoundly relaxed, but the mind is still aware. And when I first started listening to these, I would just fall asleep, because I was, responding to that borderline between awake and asleep. And it took some practice to maintain my awareness. A very interesting clue is when you're laying there and you think you're aware and you're not doing it right or something, and then you hear yourself gently snoring. If you hear yourself snoring, it means your body is profoundly relaxed and your mind is aware and alert. And I thought it would be that feeling. I thought would be a little more profound, a little more obvious, a little more different than my physical way of being. But it's not that different. It's very subtle. And so it takes practice to recognize these subtle states. And yet, when you're in a subtly different state, it can make all the difference on how you view the world and how you choose to interact with it. And so these types of sounds were very useful for me. I eventually met this person, Kevin Causey, who ended up being my business partner in the company Sacred Acoustics. He's the primary audio engineer, but we worked together to create these sounds. We started out creating them just for our own personal use, but eventually made them available to others. And that's when Dr. Alexander, who you mentioned, invited me to help teach people how to use these tones to engender these kinds of transcendental states. And some people have the motivation to use these kinds of sounds for things like out-of-body experience and remote viewing, but many people listen to them just to get a good night's sleep, to relieve anxiety. We did a pilot study in Manhattan, and after 2 weeks of listening, people reduced their anxiety by 26%. So that's pretty remarkable. And so you don't have to have some spiritual goal to find these kinds of tones useful. Other people listen to them to help them focus or study. But my favorite thing to do with them is related to aspects of personal growth. When we can really get behind our limiting beliefs, our reactive emotions, and really start to gain that grander perspective, it helps live our lives on all levels.
So we had set up a link. It's jjflizanes.com/sacred audio to get a free audio to try. Can you tell everyone who's listening who didn't do it the first time what they can experience when they sign up to get that free audio?
Okay, when you put in your email, we'll send you a link to a 20-minute recording that contains what we call our frequencies. And so we invite you to use headphones. Do not listen when you drive. If you're driving now, we do not recommend that. But listen with headphones, find a quiet moment, and see what happens. Everyone is going to respond slightly differently because we're all starting with a different set of brain waves. In fact, they discovered somewhat recently that our brain waves are unique enough from one to the next person that they could even be used as fingerprints. So it's no surprise that we respond differently when we listen to these tones, but generally speaking, people will feel a relaxed sensation and maybe some vibrations in their body. Others will have, visual things. It all is, the exciting part is to try it and see for yourself how it might work. And also on that website, sacredacoustics.com, once you get there and put your email in, you'll find a free series of training videos where I explain a lot more of the specifics on how all of this works.
And what is a time frame that people should dedicate to trying it to really get the best benefit?
The best benefit is going to come if you put in at least 20 minutes a day. That's why we made this free recording, 20 minutes. And some people, that's all they ever listen to, and they gain benefit from that, and it's completely free and it's yours to keep forever. If you want to have deeper experiences, listening for longer or applying other types of meditative techniques can be useful. Some people think if they're not doing it every day, that it's just not going to do anything for them. But absolutely, if you can only take time to do it once a week, there will still be benefits. And people stop and start, and there's always cumulative benefits each time you pick it up again.
Okay. So again, and I believe there's also another free offer from Dr. Alexander at this link as well. It's jjflizanes.com/sacred audio, and you can have access to both of those. So Karen, what's next for you? What's next in the world of taking this information and spreading it around the world?
Well, we have, Eben and I have, that's Dr. Alexander. He and I have created a new site that just went live earlier this month called innersanctumcenter.com. And that's where we've created a program, and we include some other audio files. And we hope to do live Q&A sessions once a month and really engage on a level that we haven't really done before online. But it's what we do in person when we teach our workshops. And we hope that this will help us reach more people with learning how to really get to know your inner world, because the more that you can refine your inner world, the more that you'll find your outer world seems to take care of itself.
All right. Well, everyone, those of you that haven't already checked out and downloaded your free 20-minute binaural beat meditation, go to jjflizanes.com/sacred audio. And from there, look around for the free trainings. And there are other more specific audios designed for different purposes. I know you have one on healing, right?
Yes, there's all kinds of purposes that healing and sleeping and focus, all of those things. Yes.
Great. Karen, this has been a delightful conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to be on the show again. And I know everyone's going to go over and get at least their 20-minute and explore that further, especially those of you that resonate with Karen's story and with everybody's story. But if you're that person who's just in your head more than you want to be, we need to open up some of those parts of your brain so we can experience, again, that the penetration of emotion that so powerfully attracts everything that we want to us. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I love it. I think that audio and sounds, just like you, I have that same desire to simplify and to really get into meditation or into a different brain state quickly. And I also love your audios and love binaural beats, because I think that does really help most of us who are thinkers get there really quickly. So thank you again for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure to have this conversation.